For centuries, in taverns and ports of the North Atlantic, mariners spoke of an animal with a long serpent-like body. In Nordic countries, this animal was known as the Sjöormen. In Sweden, in the early 17th century, stories began to circulate about an enormous sea serpent, the Sjöormen, said to be living in Lake Storsjön. The serpent was seen moving through the water, surfacing in parts, then disappearing again. Sometimes the serpent was called a Storsjöodjuret, the Great Lake Monster of Storsjön, another name for the same serpent. A manuscript dated from 1635 describes how the serpent was bound with a spell to prevent it from attacking people using the lake. The spell was cut into the Frosjö runestone by the rune master Ketil Runska. The runestone was then erected on the island of Frosjön in the middle of Lake Storsjön. The serpent was finally fixed to the depths of Storsjön, held in place by the stone and the words cut into it. Later accounts seem to have confirmed that the binding mattered. When the Frosjö runestone was briefly broken and lay on the ground, various disturbances and sightings in the lake followed. When the stone was raised again and reassembled, those disturbances stopped. The lake settled, and the serpent, apparently, remained below. In 1685, Anders Plantin, writing under the Latin name Andreas Plantinus, as was customary among scholars of the time, returned to the serpent of Lake Storsjön and attempted to describe its full extent, as it was believed to lie within the lake. His account is unusual in that he did not describe a living animal moving through the water, but instead presented the serpent as a fixed body occupying the lake. He wrote that the creature's head lay beneath the Frosjö runestone, directly under the stone raised on Frosjön. From that point, he traced the body outward across the lake as a single, continuous length, not as a series of sightings. According to his description, it extended toward the village of Knitta and then onto Hilla Sand, where the tail was said to lie buried beneath the shore. The description fixed the creature in relation to known ground. The head lay under the stone, the body crossed open water, the tail reached the shore. Plantin called the creature a ro. A ro is a place-bound spirit in Scandinavian folklore, a being tied to a specific location, a lake, a forest, a mountain, or a river, and confined to it. One interesting troll story tells of the serpent's origins. Two trolls named Yata and Kata were working on a lake shore. They set their cauldrons close to the lake and tended them there for a long time, long enough that the trolls themselves became part of the site, and people avoided the shoreline for a wide stretch in either direction. One day, a sound began to rise from one of the vessels, low at first, then clearer, compared to a sick child groaning. The sound grew louder and louder and sharper, until it ended suddenly with a violent crack, like thunder breaking directly overhead. At that moment, something leapt from the cauldron. It was described as a black, serpent-like body with a head shaped like a cat. It struck the ground and slid straight into the lake, and this is how the Great Lake Monster came to be. Long after the trolls were gone, on August 10th, 1977, Michael Eriksson was 16 years old when he saw the serpent in the harbor at Frosjön. He was standing above the harbor when the back of the animal broke the surface. Dark, smooth, and heavy, about the size and shape of a Volkswagen. He rode down on his bicycle, and by the time he reached the harbor, it was gone. A few other people who had been there were standing in shock, staring at the water. About 40 minutes later, it surfaced again. This time it passed the harbor close enough for him to follow it along the shore, no more than 10 meters away. Two sections of the body moved together, first a smaller rise, then open water, then a longer stretch of back, moving straight ahead with no side-to-side motion. The skin was dark, like a whale's. Several meters of the body stayed above the surface as it moved. He followed it for nearly 300 meters before it slipped under again and disappeared back into the lake. Other reports from Lake Storsjön accumulated over time. Witnesses described parts of a long body breaking the surface, sometimes humps, sometimes a head. Estimates of length varied, but often settled around 10 meters. Dark coloration and steady forward motion were repeated details. Similar accounts were recorded beyond Sweden. Around 1815, 4 fishermen in Romsdalsfjorden on the western coast of Norway saw a large animal moving slowly through the water. Its body curved like a worm. They judged its length at roughly 50 feet, about 15 meters. The head appeared large, with a pointed snout, and several fins rose near the front of the body. The men fired at it. The creature dived, surfaced again, turned toward their boat, and followed them before vanishing into deeper water. In 1902, at Valur in Østfold, a parish priest named Hans Davidson and 6 other adults watched a creature with 3 dark, glistening humps break the surface. They estimated its length at 15 to 20 meters. The head swung from side to side as it moved. Davidson entered the sighting into the parish book and added a sketch. In 1969, 2 brothers fishing at Hallandsvannet near Mandal described a long black body, a red mouth, large round eyes, and horn-like projections on the head. They compared its nostrils to those of a newborn foal. The list of sightings does not stop there. By the time the sea serpent began to appear in written reports outside Scandinavia, it was already firmly embedded in Nordic folklore. From there, the trail runs from Greenland, across New England, and into the South Atlantic. In the summer of 1734, a missionary ship was moving along the western coast of Greenland, 3 days beyond Nuuk, on its way north toward the Danish settlement at Disco Bay. The voyage belonged to the colonial mission led by Hans Egede, a Danish-Norwegian priest who had already spent years in Arctic waters. He had come north with a specific belief in mind, that the old Norse settlements of Greenland, founded centuries earlier and long silent, might still exist somewhere beyond the ice. Christian communities cut off from Europe since the Middle Ages and waiting to be found again. But they were not there. The farms and churches of the old Norse settlements were gone. Egede found only Inuit communities living along the coast. The mission quickly changed its purpose. A search for Norse settlers now became a conversion effort, followed by the building of churches and permanent settlements, reasserting Denmark-Norway's rule along the shore. In those years, Denmark and Norway were joined as a single kingdom in personal union. So Egede was no stranger to these waters. He knew ice, he knew whales, and he knew how familiar animals behaved at sea. As it will forever be recorded in the annals of maritime mythology, during this expedition, an unusual sighting occurred. Interestingly enough, the sighting did not come from him directly, but from his son, Paul. On July 6, 1734, Paul Egede, then in his 20s, was on deck when something rose from the water close to the ship. It came up high enough that its head reached the level of the yardarm, towering above the deck. It did not surface briefly and vanish. It stayed in view long enough to be watched. The head was long and pointed. It blew water like a whale. Beneath it, broad flippers broke the surface, not narrow fins, but wide paddles, moving with weight. The body behind them appeared rough and uneven, described as wrinkled and irregular as though covered with shellwork or scales. What could be seen of it was as thick as the ship itself. When the creature went under, it did not simply sink, it threw itself backward, and at a distance of a full ship's length behind the head, a long section of tail rose out of the water before following the rest below. Others on board saw it as well. Pohl recorded the encounter in his notes, and later, when his father put together his published descriptions of Greenland, the account was included almost word for word. Hans Egede did not present it as a rumor. He dated it and recorded it in detail. He distinguished it from the whales he had already drawn and catalogued elsewhere. Another missionary on the voyage, Mr. Byng, later added a detail that stayed with the account. He remarked that the creature's eyes appeared red compared to burning fire, and that this, more than its size, marked it as something unusual. Egede returned to the sighting more than once in his writings. He did not speculate at length about what it was. He did not claim it attacked the ship. He treated it as something seen clearly, at close range, by men accustomed to the sea, and recorded it alongside ice conditions, coastlines, and animals he otherwise recognized. The image of the creature found its way onto maps and engravings of the northern seas. Its form, long body, raised head, trailing tail began to circulate far beyond Greenland itself. By the middle of the 18th century, the northern serpent was no longer confined to lakes and fjords. It had followed ships into open water, risen beside a missionary vessel, and entered the written record of European exploration. And it would not be the last time. Leaving the Arctic seas behind and drawing closer to American shores, one sea serpent sighting would come to dominate American imagination and newspaper columns for years. It became known as the Great American Sea Serpent. When the serpent appeared off Cape Ann, Massachusetts in 1817, it did not appear far offshore on the open ocean. It entered a working harbor close enough to be watched from boats, wharves, and rocky points along the shore. The first report on August 6th came from the captain of a coasting vessel who claimed to have seen a long creature at the mouth of Gloucester Harbor. He spoke of it openly and was laughed at for it in an auction room. 2 women and a fisherman reported seeing something the same day. Their accounts carried no weight and were dismissed as pure imagination. 4 days later, the laughter began to fade and more serious reports started to pile up. On August 10th, Mrs. Amos Story noticed what she took to be a tree trunk lying near 10 Pound Island until it moved. Near Rocky Neck, Lydia Wanson judged the thing she saw to be 60 or 70 feet long. William Rowe, watching from another vantage point, claimed it showed closer to 100 feet of body riding the surface. What had been a joke just days before was now a shared concern. Something long, heavy, and alive was moving through the harbor, visible from different angles at the same time. By August 14th, the sightings were close enough to leave details. Solomon Allen, a shipmaster, watched the creature move through the water and described a head-shaped something like that of a rattlesnake, but nearly as large as a horse's. At times it moved in slow circles. At others it traveled nearly straight. When it dived, it appeared to go down vertically and reappear hundreds of yards away within minutes. The mariner Amos Story saw only a portion of the body at any one time, 10 or 12 feet, but judged its speed at nearly a mile in 2 or 3 minutes. Eepes Ellery, watching through a spyglass, saw the animal open its mouth. The top of the head appeared flat. William Foster, a merchant, noticed the marks it left on the water, lines behind it like those made by skates on ice. Matthew Gaffney, a ship carpenter, came within about 30 feet of it in a small boat. He described a head as large as a 4-gallon keg and a body as thick as a barrel, with at least 40 feet visible. His account was corroborated by another merchant who stood with him. Sewell Toppin, master of the schooner Laura, saw it pass close to his quarter, dark in color, while crewmen shouted that they could see its tongue. The descriptions differed in small ways. The length and movement did not. They were all reporting the same creature. The Linnaean Society of New England was a Boston-based scientific society active from about 1814 to the early 1820s, formed to promote the study of natural history. Its members, largely physicians and educated amateurs, played an early role in American science. On August 18, 1817, the Linnaean Society of New England appointed a committee to investigate. They did not wish to rely on rumor. The members prepared a list of questions and took sworn depositions from witnesses of known reputation in the town. Judges, shipmasters, merchants, and carpenters all gave independent statements. Some spoke of a horn upon the head, others mentioned a red forked tongue. On at least one occasion, 2 serpents were said to have been seen together, moving side by side in the harbor. By late summer, the reports had become formal enough to appear in print as sworn testimony and official notice. Boston Daily Advertiser, September 1817, on the Linnaean Society Inquiry. The committee appointed by the Linnaean Society have examined the witnesses separately and have taken their statements upon oath. While some diversity exists in minor particulars, the witnesses agree in the main features of the animal's appearance, its extraordinary length, its serpentine form, and the rapidity of its motion. The committee are unanimously of opinion that the animal is not any species of fish hitherto described, but belongs to a class at present unknown. Salem Gazette, September 27, 1817. The Young Serpent Incident. A small serpent-like animal, supposed to be the young of the great marine serpent, lately seen in the harbor, was taken alive near Loblolly Cove by Mr. Colby and his sons. The creature exhibited great ferocity, coiling itself and striking violently, and was with difficulty secured. It has since been conveyed to Boston for examination by the Linnaean Society. On September 27th, a farmer named Colby and his sons were gathering hay near Loblolly Cove, several miles from Gloucester Harbor, when they came upon a small serpent-like animal, about 3.5 feet long, with raised bunches along its back. Colby pinned it to a rock with a pitchfork. The animal twisted violently, biting its own body and shaking as one dog shakes another in a fight. Its tail struck the pitchfork handle with a hard, clicking sound. The carcass was carried to a nearby house and later sent to Boston, where it was examined by members of the Linnaean Society. They declared it to be the young of the Great Sea Serpent and named it Scoliophis atlanticus. Only later did closer examination show it to be a common black snake, its body distorted by severe deformities. In 1818, Captain Richard Rich, a respected whaler, organized a serious hunt. He recruited men who had seen the creature and waited for the same calm conditions under which it had appeared before. On August 18th, he reported seeing a long animal near Annisquam Bar, which he judged to be at least 100 feet in length. Weeks later, on September 6th, he harpooned and killed what he believed to be the serpent. It proved to be a large horse mackerel, an Atlantic bluefin tuna. Rich later explained how its speed and the pattern of waves it created on still water could produce the appearance of a long, humped back moving just beneath the surface. In the summer of 1819, sightings were reported off Nahant, then a seaside retreat for Boston's wealthier families. Observers spoke of 13 folds of body breaking the surface, of a head raised 2 feet above the water, of an eye that appeared bright and glistening in calm conditions. Hundreds were said to have watched from rocks and verandas along the shore. A bounty was offered for the creature's capture. Ferries carried crowds to Gloucester. New lodging was built to house those who hoped to see it. Fishermen scanned the water not only for fish, but for coils. The Linnaean Society's final report concluded that while details varied, the witnesses were in agreement about one thing: the animal they described was long and it moved like a serpent. By the early 1820s, the excitement faded. Newspapers grew a bit tired of the subject. One editor remarked with dry certainty that the existence of the serpent was now proven beyond doubt. The sea serpent of New England had entered the record not as a single sighting, but as a communal event, named witnesses, sworn statements, failed hunts, mistaken bodies, and months in which an entire harbor watched the water and waited for something long to rise again. On August 6, 1848, the British naval frigate HMS Daedalus was sailing across the South Atlantic, several hundred miles northwest of the Cape of Good Hope, on passage to St. Helena. The sea was calm, visibility was clear. The ship was under command of Captain Peter McEwe, a career officer of the Royal Navy. Shortly after 5 in the afternoon, something appeared ahead of the ship. Off the starboard bow, a long, dark form rose from the water. It did not break the surface in pieces. It came up as a single length, moving steadily, parallel to the ship. The head was raised several feet above the sea and was described as snake-like, with no visible mane or fins. The body behind it remained mostly submerged, but its length was unmistakable. Captain McEwe watched it through a telescope. So did First Lieutenant Edgar Drummond, who later gave the most detailed account. They judged the visible portion of the creature to be at least 60 feet long, with more of the body concealed beneath the surface. Its color was dark brown or black. The motion was smooth and deliberate, without the rolling or undulation typical of known sea animals. The creature remained in sight for 20 minutes. It kept pace with the ship, neither approaching nor falling behind, before slowly sinking beneath the water and disappearing. No spray followed it, no sudden dive. It simply went down. McEwe did not treat the sighting as a curiosity. When the Daedalus reached port, he submitted a formal report to the Admiralty, signed by multiple officers. Drummond's written description was later published in the Illustrated London News, where it was accompanied by an engraving based directly on his account. Written account to Admiralty as published in the Times. The Times, London, October 10th, 1848. Extract from a report submitted to the Admiralty by Captain Peter McEwe, commanding HMS Daedalus. On the afternoon of the 6th of August, when on our passage from the Cape of Good Hope towards St. Helena, the weather being clear and the sea smooth, a most remarkable object was observed crossing our lee quarter. It was at first taken for some portion of wreck or floating timber, but was soon discovered to be an enormous serpent, with its head and shoulders kept about 4 feet constantly above the surface of the sea. There was at the very least 60 feet of the animal visible, and from the comparison we were able to make with the length of our main topsail yard, I should judge that there were at least 30 or 40 feet more beneath the surface. The color of the upper part was dark brown, with a yellowish or whitish appearance about the throat. The head was long and flattened, and the mouth, as far as we could observe, appeared to be large. The creature moved at the pace of from 12 to 15 miles an hour and passed so close under our lee quarter that, had it been a man of my acquaintance, I should have been able to recognize his features with the naked eye. The officers and men who witnessed the appearance are all of opinion that it was a living animal of extraordinary dimensions and not any known species of fish or whale. The report caused an immediate stir. Naturalists questioned it. Cartoonists mocked it. Others defended the officers, pointing out that both McCue and Drummond were experienced seamen, familiar with whales, sharks, and floating debris, and unlikely to mistake them for something with a raised head and continuous body. Alternative explanations were proposed almost immediately. Some suggested a giant seal, others proposed a line of seaweed, a whale seen at an odd angle, or an optical illusion produced by light and distance. Each explanation required the officers to have misjudged not just shape, but scale, motion, and duration. McCue did not respond publicly. Drummond did, but only once. He insisted that what they saw was neither whale nor fish, and that the head alone ruled out those identifications. The image of the creature, however it was interpreted, traveled quickly. The engraving was reprinted. The story was translated. The sea serpent was no longer confined to fishermen's accounts or coastal rumor. It had risen alongside a Royal Navy frigate and entered the global press. From that point on, the sea serpent was not just a thing seen from shore or small boats. It was something that could appear in mid-ocean, pace a warship, and be described by officers whose words carried weight far beyond the waters where the sighting occurred. By the late 19th century, the sea serpent no longer belonged only to crowded harbors or naval quarterdecks. It appeared far from land, with no witnesses except the men who saw it and the water that closed behind it. In the summer of 1878, William Albert Andrews and his brother set out from South Boston in a 19-foot dory named Nautilus. The boat was small, lightly built, and lateen-rigged, weighing little more than 600 pounds. Their aim was simple and reckless by the standards of the time, to cross the Atlantic in it. They were alone. No escort, no accompanying vessel, no harbor crowds watching from shore. On the evening of Wednesday, July 17th, the sea lay in an intense calm. Whales were visible at a distance, spouting and sounding, their movements familiar enough not to raise alarm. Andrews had been watching them when he turned and saw something else. About 200 feet from the boat, a portion of a long, black body appeared near the surface. It resembled the tail of a snake, thick and narrow at once, 5 to 15 inches in diameter. Only 12 to 15 feet of it was visible. The end was blunt and pale, almost white. It was descending. Andrews watched it sink, noting the corrugated shape of the body as it moved downward. Beneath the surface, a darker mass was visible, aligned with the tail, as if much more of the animal had already passed below. The water broke with a splash, and the sound carried clearly in the still air. He called to his brother, who was at the cuddy preparing food, and asked him to pass up the hatchet, not because Andrews expected to use it, but because he wanted it within reach. His brother heard the splash and saw the shape in the water before it vanished. Later, Andrews admitted that he had never put much faith in sea serpent stories, but after that evening, he wrote that there were denizens of the deep not yet explained or illustrated by zoological societies. That night, they heard heavy breathing and splashing behind the boat. They assumed it was whales. At dawn, they saw whales again, beating the water miles away. nothing more surfaced near Nautilus. There were no affidavits taken, no committees formed, no crowd gathered on a shore. Just two men, a small boat, and an entry in a logbook written far from land where mistakes were costly and imagination had little room to roam. The New England coast did not encounter the Serpent once and move on. It met it again at long intervals in different places and under different conditions. The names changed, the pattern did not. In the late 1630s, the English traveler John Josselyn recorded that people along Cape Ann spoke of a sea serpent seen coiled on a rock like a cable. A boat approached it, carrying Englishmen and local Indians. The English wanted to fire. The Indians warned them not to try unless they were certain of killing it outright. If the creature were wounded and not slain, they said, the men would not survive the encounter. The serpent was left alone. In 1779, Edward Preble, 1761 to 1807, then a young midshipman aboard the American warship Protector, was ordered to investigate a large serpent-like creature sighted in Penobscot Bay. Preble was not chosen at random. Even at that age, he was regarded as capable and steady, trusted with difficult work. He later became a celebrated U.S. Navy captain. The day was clear and calm. The animal lay motionless on the water, while officers examined it through glasses. Preble was ordered to man a large boat armed with a swivel gun and pulled by 12 oars, and to approach as closely as possible. As the boat closed the distance, the creature raised its head roughly 10 feet above the surface and began to move away. Preble pressed on. The swivel was fired, loaded with bullets. The shot had no effect except to increase the creature's speed. It fled, outrunning the boat and vanishing from sight. Preble rarely spoke of the incident later in life. Those who knew him said he mentioned it only occasionally, aware that most people would doubt the account. When he did speak of it, he estimated the creature's length at between 100 and 150 feet, larger than a barrel in thickness. The story survives through later retellings, filtered in part through James Fenimore Cooper, who embellished details and shifted roles. Beneath those layers, the core event remains unchanged: a disciplined naval crew, armed and ordered to engage, watching something rise, move, and escape. By the early 19th century, the Serpent returned to public view near Nahant, just north of Boston. These were not working harbors filled with fishermen, but summer shores crowded with visitors. In 1833, groups of men and women reported seeing a long creature offshore, its body forming loops and folds on the surface. Some counted a dozen humps. Others described a raised head and a bright, glistening eye. Pleasure boats watched it pass. People who had mocked earlier reports said quietly that they no longer did. The sightings repeated over several summers. Different boats, different observers, the same outline on the water. Taken separately, each report could be dismissed. Together, they formed a coastline memory: Cape Ann, Penobscot Bay, Nahant, Gloucester. The places changed, but not at random. These were waters watched closely, traveled often, and worked hard. When something unfamiliar appeared, it did so where eyes were already trained to notice small changes in the sea. What these reports keep telling us is that there may be something to the old stories of sea monsters. Perhaps they were more than maritime legend or a cartographer's embellishment. What had once been told by mariners in dusky taverns over the centuries was, in modern times, written down in newspapers, sworn before committees, and telegraphed to Admiralty. No such serpent was ever captured, catalogued, and set before science. but these accounts also cannot be easily dismissed. Again and again, something long appeared in the water, surfacing briefly, then slipping away before it could be captured, photographed, or examined clearly.